On Rainy Street, people often walked with umbrellas. The street was small and quiet. It had an old flower shop, a bookstore with a blue door, and a little cafe on the corner. The cafe was called Morning Leaves. It was not a famous place. It was not even a new place. The paint on the sign was a little old, and one of the front windows did not close very well in winter. But the cafe was warm, and it smelled of coffee, bread, and sugar. On rainy days, the windows turned white with steam, and the yellow lights inside made the whole place look soft and safe. Emma had worked there for almost 6 years. She was 27, and most people remembered her kind voice before they remembered her face. Every morning she came in before 7, turned on the lights, cleaned the tables, and checked the bread in the glass case. By the time the first customers arrived, the room already felt alive. To Emma, Morning Leaves was more than a job. It was the place where she had learned how to stand on her own after her mother died. It was the place where Mrs. Bell, the old owner, had once said to her, "You do not need to smile all the time. Just breathe first." Emma had never forgotten that. But now Mrs. Bell was gone. She had died 2 months earlier, and after that, everything felt uncertain. Her son lived in another country and did not want to keep the cafe. He had sent a short message to Emma, polite but clear. "The cafe will be sold at the end of autumn." Emma still came to work every day, and she still smiled at customers. But each time she looked around the room, she felt something heavy in her chest. She tried not to think about what would happen when the new owner came. She tried not to ask herself whether Morning Leaves would still feel like Morning Leaves at all. One Thursday morning, the rain started before sunrise and did not stop. Emma was wiping cups behind the counter when the door opened. She looked up and saw a man she knew well. Though she had never really spoken to him, he came every Thursday at the same time, 8:15. Not earlier, not later. He wore a dark coat, and his hair was usually a little wet from the rain. He looked about 40. He was not handsome in the easy, bright way that made people turn around in the street. But there was something calm about him, something quiet. He walked to the counter and gave Emma a small nod. "A black coffee, please." That was all he ever said. Emma made the coffee, and he carried it to the table by the window in the far corner. He always sat there for about an hour, looking outside at the rain or at the people passing by. He never seemed to be in a hurry. He did not work on a laptop, and he was rarely on his phone. As far as Emma could tell, nobody ever came to meet him. He just sat there alone, week after week, as if the cafe were part of a promise. Emma knew his name only because she had once seen it on a payment record. Daniel Reed. That Thursday, though, something was different. When Emma looked toward the window table, she saw a dark blue notebook beside his coffee. Daniel was writing in it with slow, careful movements. He did not stop often to think. It looked as if he already knew what he wanted to say. Emma looked away after a second. It felt rude to watch. Still, she kept thinking about the notebook. At 9:10, Daniel stood up, put on his coat, and left. Emma went back to work, and the morning got busy. Around 10, when things finally grew quiet again, she walked over to clean the table by the window. The notebook was still there. Emma stopped. For a moment, she thought Daniel might come back through the door. But the street outside was empty except for rain and a man riding past on a bicycle. She picked up the notebook. It was dry and slightly warm from the room. She turned it over, hoping to find a name or a phone number on the cover, but there was nothing. Maybe, she thought, the first page would help. She opened it. At the top of the page, in neat handwriting, was one sentence. "If you ever come back, I will be here on Thursdays." Emma stared at the words. She told herself to close the notebook at once. She really did. But then she turned one more page. It rained again today. You always liked rainy mornings. She read another line. The flower shop changed the broken bucket outside. You would have noticed right away. And another. I still do not know if waiting is foolish. Emma closed the notebook quickly. This was not a work notebook. It was not a list. It was something private, written for someone who was not there. She stood by the window for a few seconds, listening to the rain on the glass. Then she put the notebook in the drawer under the counter and locked it. All afternoon, she tried not to think about it. She failed. That night, after the cafe closed, the room felt larger than usual. The chairs were upside down on the tables, the lights were low, and the rain had become softer. Emma stood alone behind the counter, looking at the drawer. She knew she should leave the notebook alone. But in the end, she took it out and sat by the lamp. The notebook was full of entries, and all of them were dated on Thursdays. Little by little, a story began to appear. Daniel had once loved a woman named Clara. Years ago, they had met at Morning Leaves. They had sat by the same window, argued about films, shared cake, and watched the rain together. Then Clara had left the city. Emma could not tell exactly why. The notebook did not explain everything. But before Clara left, she had said, "If I ever come back, I will find you on Rainy Street." So Daniel kept coming. Not every day, not at first even every week. But over time, Thursdays became his day to return. Some entries were about memory. Today they played the old jazz song you liked. I almost turned to tell you. I saw a yellow umbrella and followed the wrong person for half the street. Some entries sounded tired. I was angry for a long time. That was easier than being sad. I told myself to stop coming. I came anyway. And some were gentler than Emma expected. Mrs. Bell gave me free cake again. She said, waiting is easier with sugar. Emma smiled at that in spite of herself. When she closed the notebook, it was late. She put it back in the drawer and turned off the lamp. The next Thursday, Daniel came at 8:15 as usual. Emma had already placed the notebook under the counter. When he stepped inside, rain was shining on his coat. He ordered his coffee, and before she handed him the cup, she said, "You left something here last week." For the first time, Daniel's expression changed. Emma gave him the notebook. He took it carefully. "Thank you," he said. Then he looked at her, and his voice became quieter. "Did you read it?" Emma could have lied. Instead, she said, "Only a little. I was trying to find your name at first. Then I saw the first lines. I'm sorry." Daniel did not answer right away. Emma felt her face grow warm. At last he said, "Most people would not say sorry. I still should." He looked down at the notebook and then back at her. "Thank you for keeping it safe." That day he sat at the window as usual, but he did not write. He only held the notebook in his hands and stared outside. After that, something small began to change between them. At first, it was almost nothing. The next Thursday, when Emma put down his coffee, Daniel asked, "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 6 years." He nodded. "Then you knew Mrs. Bell well." "Yes," Emma said. "She was kind to me when I needed it." Daniel looked toward the back room. "She was kind to many people." A week later, he asked whether the cafe was really going to be sold. Emma said yes. "At the end of autumn, I think." He looked around the room for a moment. That would be a shame. It was a simple sentence, but it stayed with Emma all day. As the weeks passed, Daniel spoke a little more. Not much, but enough for Emma to see that his silence was not coldness. He was the kind of person who seemed to carry his thoughts carefully, as if he did not want to drop them in front of strangers. One evening, while sorting old papers in the office, Emma found a flat box in the back of a drawer. It was full of old photographs, receipts, menus, and birthday cards people had once left for Mrs. Bell. Emma smiled as she turned through them. Then she stopped. One photo showed a younger Mrs. Bell standing behind the cafe counter. Beside her stood a young man Emma knew at once was Daniel, though his face was softer and his hair was longer. Next to him was a woman with a yellow umbrella. She was laughing at something outside the frame. On the back of the photo, in Mrs. Bell's handwriting, were 4 words: Daniel and Clara. Thursday rain. Emma looked again at the woman's face. She had bright eyes, a wide smile, and a kind of light in her expression that made the whole picture feel warm. Behind the photo, half hidden in the box, was a small envelope. Emma pulled it out carefully. On the front, in faded blue ink, were the words, "For Daniel, if he comes back." Emma sat down very slowly. For a moment, she only stared at the envelope. Her heart was beating fast. She wanted to open it. She knew she should not. The letter was not hers, and she had already crossed one line with the notebook. So she slipped the envelope back into the box, closed the lid, and took a long breath. The next morning, she put the letter in her bag. All day she waited for Thursday. When Daniel came in, Emma did not speak right away. She made his coffee first. Then, as she placed the cup on the counter, she said, "I found something yesterday. I think it belongs to you." Daniel looked confused. Emma handed him the envelope. He read the words on the front, and the color seemed to leave his face. "Where did you get this?" "In an old photo box in the office. I was sorting Mrs. Bell's things." Daniel did not move. For a second, Emma thought he might not take it, but then he reached out with both hands, as if the paper were fragile. He went to the window table without another word. Emma tried not to watch him, but it was impossible not to look. He sat down, turned the envelope over once, and carefully opened it. His eyes moved across the page. At first his face was still, and then something changed. He lowered his head and pressed one hand against his mouth. Emma looked away. She gave him time. Nearly 20 minutes later, Daniel came back to the counter with the letter folded in his hand. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. Emma glanced around. The cafe was quiet. She nodded. Daniel stood there for a second, as if he had forgotten how to begin. Then he said, "Clara came back." Emma did not speak. "She came back last year," he said, "just for a short time. She came here on a Thursday and left this letter with Mrs. Bell." He looked down at the paper. "She wrote that she waited for me 3 Thursdays in a row. But I never came." Emma said softly, "Why not?" Daniel gave a tired smile that held no joy at all. "My father was dying that month. I had gone to stay with him in another town. I had stopped coming here for a while." He looked toward the window. "If I had come 1 week earlier or 1 week later, I would have seen her." Emma felt a tight pain in her chest. "What did she say?" Daniel unfolded the letter, but he did not read it aloud. He only looked at it as he spoke. "She said she left years ago because her mother was ill, and everything in her life changed at once. She thought she would return sooner. She thought I would wait for a little while, not for years." He let out a quiet breath. "She wrote that she was afraid to contact me directly. She did not know if I was angry. She did not know if I had moved on." Emma looked at the letter. "Did she leave an address?" Daniel nodded. "She lives in Seabrook now. She runs a small bakery with her sister." For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Emma asked the question that was already in the room. "Will you go?" Daniel looked at her, and for the first time Emma saw how tired he really was. I don't know, he said. I waited a long time. Maybe too long. Emma thought of the notebook, of the careful handwriting, of the rainy Thursdays that had become part of his life. If you do nothing, she said quietly, you will still be waiting. Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, folded the letter, and slipped it back into the envelope. The next Thursday, he did not come. Emma told herself that was a good sign. Still, when 8:15 passed and the door did not open, she felt the room grow strangely empty. He did not come the week after that either. Rainy Street looked the same. The coffee smelled the same. The window table was still there. But Emma noticed the absence every Thursday morning. She had not expected that. At the same time, the days were moving quickly. Autumn was almost over, and Mrs. Bell's son had written again to ask about a date for people to come see the cafe. Emma stood in the office with the message open on her phone and felt suddenly tired. She loved the cafe, but she had been standing still, almost as Daniel had been standing still. She had been hoping something would save the place without asking herself what she was willing to do. That night, she sat at the counter after closing and made a list. It was a simple list. Could she ask for more time? Could she borrow money? Could she make the cafe busier? Could Thursday become a special night with books, cake, and music, the way Mrs. Bell once wanted? Emma stared at the paper and then smiled a little. Maybe waiting was not enough for any story. The next morning, she wrote a long message to Mrs. Bell's son. She told him what the cafe meant to the people on Rainy Street. She told him she wanted 6 more months. She did not promise miracles. She only promised that she would try. Then she spoke to the flower shop owner, the bookseller, and some regular customers. She told them she wanted to start Thursday evenings at morning leaves, simple evenings with tea, cake, short readings, and quiet music. To her surprise, people said yes. The bookseller offered to read from his favorite novel. The woman from the flower shop said she could bring small flowers for the tables. A college student who came every Saturday said she could play the violin. By the end of the week, Emma felt more alive than she had in months. Then, on the third Thursday after the letter, at exactly 8:15, the cafe door opened. Emma looked up. Daniel stood there. But he was not alone. Beside him was a woman holding a yellow umbrella. For a moment, Emma did not move. The woman closed the umbrella by the door and smiled, nervous but warm. She was older than the woman in the photograph, of course, but Emma knew at once who she was: Clara. Daniel looked different too. He still seemed quiet, but the heavy look in his face had softened. Something had opened. He stepped closer to the counter. "Emma," he said, and his voice carried more feeling than she had ever heard in it. "This is Clara." Clara gave a small laugh. "I think you already know that." Emma smiled. "I think I do." For a second, all 3 of them stood in the warm light while rain tapped against the window. Then Clara said, "Mrs. Bell used to tell me that this cafe was full of second chances. I never believed her enough." Daniel glanced at her, and the look they shared was quiet, but full. Emma made them coffee without asking what they wanted. When she carried the cups over, Daniel and Clara were sitting at the old window table. For the first time since Emma had known him, Daniel was not looking outside. He was looking at the person in front of him. They stayed a long time that morning. They talked softly, and sometimes they laughed. Once Clara covered her face with one hand and shook her head, and Daniel smiled in a way that made him look years younger. Emma did not listen. She did not need to. Before they left, Clara came to the counter. "Daniel told me what you said," she said. Emma blinked. "What did I say?" Clara smiled. "That doing nothing is still waiting." Emma laughed. "That sounds like something I only say when I am tired." "It helped," Daniel said. Clara glanced around the cafe. Daniel also told me this place may be sold. Emma nodded. For a moment, Clara looked thoughtful. Then she said, "In Seabrook, my sister and I started with almost nothing. One oven, 2 tables, and a lot of fear. Small places can stay alive if people love them enough." Daniel added, "And if someone is brave enough to ask for help." Emma looked at them. Something in her face must have shown what she was feeling, because Clara reached across the counter and touched her hand. "You gave us our letter," she said. "Now let people give you a little help too." That evening was the first Thursday gathering at Morning Leaves. Emma had planned for 12 people. More than 30 came. The bookseller read from an old story about winter. The violin student played near the window. Clara had brought a box of small lemon cakes from Seabrook, and they were gone in 20 minutes. Daniel helped move chairs and light candles on the tables. At one point, Emma stood behind the counter with warm cups in front of her and looked around the room. People were smiling. People were staying. The cafe felt alive. It did not become easy after that. Nothing changed overnight. Money was still a problem. The future was still uncertain. But each Thursday, more people came. Some came for the music. Some came for the cake. Some came because they had heard there was a little cafe on Rainy Street where stories were read on rainy evenings. Mrs. Bell's son wrote back a week later. He agreed to wait 6 months. It was not forever, but it was enough for hope to breathe. By the time winter arrived, Morning Leaves was busier than it had been in years. Daniel no longer came only on Thursdays, though he still liked the window table best. Clara traveled in from Seabrook twice a month with fresh bread and new cake ideas. Emma laughed more easily. The crooked sign above the door was still there, but Daniel promised to fix it when the weather grew warmer. One rainy evening, after the last customers had gone home, Emma stood by the window and looked out at the street. The flower shop was dark. The bookstore had already closed. Rain moved softly under the streetlights. Behind her, Clara was wrapping bread for the morning, and Daniel was stacking cups by the sink. Emma thought about the notebook, the letter, and the Thursdays that had once seemed so lonely. She thought about Mrs. Bell and the way she had trusted small things: warm light, free cake, a kind word, one more chance. Then Emma smiled to herself. Some people came to Morning Leaves for coffee. Some came because they needed a quiet place. And some came because, on Rainy Street, in a small cafe with foggy windows and yellow light, life sometimes gave back what it had almost taken away.